is not that I do not believe in the impossible, it is simply that I refuse to limit myself to it. And it can be said that strange and unordinary things happen in this universe all the time. One case in point is that of Mike the Headless Chicken. Now, the story starts at the Olson farm, to a man by the name of Lloyd Olson. Now, Lloyd Olson was going out to the chicken coop to get himself a chicken for dinner. And he looked around for the biggest and plumpest chicken he could find. And when he finally found it, he grabbed hold of it by its neck, took it to the chopping board, and at this point the bird was squawking and flapping its wings. And so he raised up the knife and he chopped the chicken's head straight off. Well, anyways, the chicken began to run around with its head cut off, blood splattering on the ground. And Lloyd Olson decided to go back into his house and wait for a couple of hours for the chicken to die. But when he came back into the barnyard a couple hours later, he found to his surprise that the chicken was still very much alive. So he ran back into the house and he decided to phone all of his friends and family. Well, anyways, Mike the Headless Chicken at this point was being made fun of by all of his friends. They were calling him names like the Headless Freak and my personal favorite, Airhead. And, actually, what would you do if one of your friends had his head cut off and sat down beside you? You'd, of course, ridicule him. Well, anyways, Mike the Headless Chicken was getting a little bit depressed. So he went to the corner of the barn and he just lowered his stump. And as he stood there, an old cock came up. And the old cock said, "Mike the Headless Chicken." Or, not Mike the Headless Chicken, because that wasn't his name at this point, but he said, "Chicken, what's wrong?" And Mike said, "Well, all of the other chickens are laughing at me." And the old cock said, "Now you listen here, boy. You don't need a head to live in this world. I always thought heads were overrated. All you need is a heart. Why, I find that you can hear and you can see and you can feel with a heart way better than you ever could with a head." Well, anyways, Mike the Headless Chicken decided to heed the old cock's wise words. And eventually people began to arrive to see Mike the Headless Chicken. And Mike the Headless Chicken just acted as he normally would. He tried to peck at the corn, only to find that he couldn't eat anything. And he also tried to crow, only for a gurgling sound to come out. And anyways, all the people, they gathered around and took photographs, all to see this miracle chicken, and the mayor himself arrived. And eventually, Mike the Headless Chicken became a sideshow attraction, and Lloyd Olson would keep the chicken alive by dropping kernels of food into its mouth and giving it water with this little thing. I forget what it's called. It was a little utensil that drops water into a creature's neck. But anyways, Mike the Headless Chicken became known throughout the country. But eventually people began to call it out as a hoax. I mean, who could believe in a headless chicken? So eventually the Utah University decided to study him, and they eventually found out what it was. That it was something to do with his jugular vein, but anyways, at that point, Mike the Headless Chicken was declared a scientific fact. And a lot of creatures, with all these people coming up to him and telling him how wonderful he was, would get big-headed and get a little snotty. But Mike the Headless Chicken wouldn't let the fame get to his head, because of course he didn't have one. No, for him, all that was important was that he was inspiring in people and showing them that impossible things can happen, and he heeded the old cock's word that you didn't need a head, all you needed was a heart. Well, people would come all from across the world to see Mike the Headless Chicken, sheiks from Arabia, prime ministers, presidents. But eventually, one night, Lloyd Olson was sitting in his hotel when he heard a bunch of gurgling noises, and he ran in to find that Mike the Headless Chicken was choking. So Lloyd Olson tried to get some tweezers to pull out the crumb, but at that point it was too late. Mike the Headless Chicken was laying there dead. And Mike the Headless Chicken's spirit soared up into the heavens, and eventually he came before God. And God said to the chicken, "Mike the Headless Chicken, you can now enjoy the beauties of paradise. You can run around in the farmyard free and without the worry of death." Well, anyways, Mike the Headless Chicken looked up at God. I guess he didn't really look up at him, but you know what I mean. He raised his neck to him. And Mike the Headless Chicken decided that he didn't want to go into heaven and paradise, but instead he wanted to stay there on the earth for a little while and inspire other people and make them believe in impossible things. So God agreed, and so it is that Mike the Headless Chicken's spirit still lives within all of us. And occasionally he will even visit people. He once visited a marathon runner and told him that if he could lose his head and survive, then that man could certainly finish the mile. And he also stopped people from killing themselves. He actually once even stopped a terrorist from a suicide bombing a place. That was rather impressive. And he's helped people on their test and told them they're good enough to get the girl. And basically just being a spirit for all of mankind, to remind them that, as I've often said, nothing is impossible. As always, sweet dreams and good night.